They called it the Silent Settlement. When Serafina Thorne walked into the Manhattan Distinct Court to divorce her tech mogul husband Marcus, everyone expected a war. Marcus had hired the most vicious lawyers in New York. He had hidden assets. He had a mistress waiting in the car. He expected screaming. He expected tears. Instead, Serafina didn't say a word. She didn't negotiate. She didn't argue. She signed everything away in 3 minutes and walked out. Marcus thought he had won the lottery. But he didn't know that 6 hours later, a paparazzi drone would capture Serafina in the Mediterranean, clinking champagne glasses, on a yacht owned by the one man Marcus feared more than God. This isn't just a divorce story. This is the story of the most brutal, brilliant revenge plot in high society history. The air inside the private arbitration room at Bradford and Ellis smelled of stale espresso and aggressive cologne. It was the scent of expensive misery. Marcus Thorne sat at the head of the mahogany table, leaning back in his Herman Miller chair with a posture that screamed studied casualness. He checked his Patek Philippe watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. He wanted this over with. He had a flight to Aspen scheduled for 6:00 p.m., and Jessica, his personal assistant turned fiancée, was already blowing up his phone with texts about which ski chalet they should book. Across from him sat Serafina. If Marcus was a portrait of nervous energy disguised as arrogance, Serafina was a statue. She wore a charcoal business suit, vintage Dior tailored so sharply it looked like armor. Her hair was pulled back in a severe chignon, no jewelry, not even her wedding ring. That had been left on the nightstand of their penthouse in Tribeca 3 weeks ago, the morning she found the second phone taped under the vanity drawer. "Look, Serafina," Marcus said, his voice dropping to that condescending baritone he used when explaining algorithms to investors. "We can do this the hard way or the easy way. My offer stands. You get the apartment in Connecticut, the Audi, and a monthly stipend of $10,000 for 3 years. No equity in Thorne Logic. No stock options. No alimony after 2027. Marcus's lawyer, a shark named Gavin Rourke, who was famous for making senators' wives cry, slid a thick document across the table. Rourke smirked. "It's generous, Mrs. Thorne, considering you have no income and limited marketability at your age." Serafina was 34. She looked 25. But in Marcus's world, the cutthroat ecosystem of New York tech startups, she was ancient history. The silence in the room stretched. Rourke clicked his pen, a rhythmic tick-tick-tick designed to induce anxiety. Marcus watched her carefully. He knew Serafina. Or he thought he did. He expected her to break. She had been the supportive wife for 10 years. The one who hosted the dinner parties, who smoothed over his PR disasters, who proofread his code in the early days when they were living on ramen in a basement in Queens. She was emotional. She was soft. "I don't want the Connecticut house," Serafina said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a strange crystalline clarity. Marcus sighed, rolling his eyes at Rourke. "Here we go. What do you want Sarah of the Hamptons house?" "I told you that's tied up in the LLC." "I don't want the Hamptons house," she said, looking down at the papers. "I don't want the Audi. I don't want the stipend." Rourke stopped clicking his pen. "Excuse me." Serafina reached into her purse a battered leather tote that had seen better days and pulled out a cheap Bic pen. "I'll sign the waiver for all assets. I'll sign the NDA. I'll grant Marcus full ownership of Thorne Logic and all associated IP. Marcus froze. He sat up straight, his eyes narrowing. You're waiving your rights to the marital assets. Serafina Thorne Logic is valued at $400 million. "I know what it's valued at, Marcus," she said. She didn't look up. She flipped to the last page of the settlement. "Why?" Marcus asked, a sudden spike of paranoia piercing his chest. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Serafina said, her eyes finally meeting his. They were terrifyingly blank, like the windows of an empty house. "I just want to be done. I want to be free of you, today, right now." "You have to understand," Rourke interjected, looking confused for the first time in his career. If you sign this, you leave with nothing. Literally nothing. You'll be destitute. I'll manage, she said. Scritch, scratch. The sound of her signing the document was the loudest noise in the room. She signed 3 copies. She closed the folder and slid it back to Rourke. Is that it? She asked. Marcus was stunned. He felt a rush of euphoria. A dopamine hit stronger than any deal he'd ever closed. He had won. He had expected a year-long battle. He had expected to lose half his fortune. Instead, she had just rolled over. She was weaker than he thought. She was pathetic. Yeah. Marcus laughed, a nervous, giddy sound. Yeah, Sarah. That's it. You're free. Serafina stood up. She smoothed her skirt. She didn't look at Marcus again. She didn't look at the lawyer. She turned on her heel and walked out of the conference room. Wait! Marcus called out, a sudden impulse of pity hitting him. Sarah, how are you getting home? Do you want me to call you an Uber? She stopped at the door. She didn't turn around. Don't worry about me, Marcus, she said. I have a ride. The door clicked shut. Marcus turned to Rourke and pumped his fist. Did you see that? Did you see that total capitulation? God, I'm a genius. She didn't even ask for the dog. Rourke frowned, looking at the signature on the page. It's too easy, Marcus. People don't just walk away from $500 million. She did. Marcus scoffed, pulling out his phone to text Jessica. She's broken Gavin. I broke her. Now let's get a drink. I'm officially a single man. But as Serafina stepped out of the office building onto Fifth Avenue, she wasn't crying. She wasn't looking for a taxi. She checked her watch. 11:15 a.m. She walked 2 blocks east to the corner of 57th. A black car was waiting. Not an Uber, not a town car. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, the windows tinted so dark they looked like obsidian. The driver, a massive man with a scar running down his neck, stepped out and opened the rear door. Good morning, Mrs. Thorne, the driver said. Or should I say Ms. Sterling? Serafina finally smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just watched the trap snap shut. Ms. Sterling is fine, Grigori, she said, sliding into the cream leather interior. Take me to Teterboro. The jet is waiting. And the luggage? I left it all, she said, leaning back and closing her eyes. Everything I need is already on board. Marcus Thorne was drunk on victory and 3 neat scotches. By 2:00 p.m. he was at Le Bernardin holding court in a private booth. Jessica was there looking stunning and expensive in a red dress that Marcus had bought her with the company credit card. She was draped over him, giggling as he recounted the story of the morning. She literally just signed it, Jessica asked, eyes wide. She didn't want the jewels, the art. Nothing. Marcus shouted, slamming his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. She's an idiot, Jess. A total doormat. She probably thinks she's taking the moral high ground. Moral high ground doesn't pay the rent in Manhattan. The table laughed. It was filled with Marcus's sycophants, his CFO, his frat brothers, his yes men. They toasted to Marcus's genius. To the Bachelor King, yelled Dave, the VP of Marketing. Marcus raised his glass. To freedom and to upgrading. He kissed Jessica hard. But amidst the celebration, a small nagging feeling began to itch at the back of Marcus's brain. It was Gavin Rourke, his lawyer. Rourke hadn't come to the lunch. He had gone back to the office to file the papers, immediately paranoid that Serafina would change her mind. Marcus's phone buzzed. It was Rourke. Calling Gavin Rourke, attorney. Buzzkill, Marcus muttered, declining the call. It buzzed again immediately. Answer it, babe, Jessica said, tracing the rim of her glass. Maybe she's already begging for money. Marcus laughed and picked up. Gavin. Tell me the ink is dry. Tell me she's officially the past. Marcus, where are you? Rourke's voice was tight, strained. I'm at lunch, celebrating. Why, what's wrong? I'm at the clerk's office, Rourke said. I just filed the settlement, but Marcus, something triggered in the system when I entered the final decree. Triggered what a fee. No, a lien notification. I'm looking at the title deeds for the Tribeca penthouse and the Hamptons estate. Marcus, did you take out a second mortgage? What, no. The company is flush. Why would I take out a mortgage? Because according to the county clerk, neither of these properties belongs to you or the LLC. Marcus lowered his glass. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. What are you talking about? I bought them. My name is on the deed. Your name is on the trust, Rourke corrected. The Aurora Borealis Trust. You told me that was your holding company. It is. I set it up 5 years ago. Marcus, Rourke whispered, I'm looking at the incorporation papers for the trust right now. You aren't the beneficiary. You're listed as the trustee. The beneficiary is an offshore entity registered in the Cayman Islands called Nemesis Holdings. Okay, so that's probably just how my accountant set it up to dodge taxes. I called your accountant, Rourke said. He didn't set up Nemesis Holdings. He's never heard of it. But I did a quick search. The signatory for Nemesis Holdings. It's Serafina. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. That's impossible. Serafina doesn't know how to set up an offshore shell company. She's a housewife. She studied art history. Marcus, if she owns the trust and the trust owns the houses. She owns the houses. Marcus finished, his voice trembling. It gets worse, Rourke said. I just had the paralegal run a check on Thorn Logic's founding IP patents, the code, the core algorithm you use to build the platform. I wrote that code, Marcus snapped, in our basement. You wrote the front end, Rourke said. But the patent for the predictive data engine, the thing that makes the company worth $400 million, it's not in your name, it's in the name of the original developer. I am the developer. No, Marcus. The patent is registered to S. Sterling, Serafina Sterling, dated 2014, 2 years before you incorporated. Marcus dropped the phone. It clattered onto the white tablecloth, knocking over a glass of red wine. The stain spread like a gunshot wound across the fabric. Babe, Jessica asked, pulling away. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Marcus couldn't breathe. She signed the waiver, his mind screamed. She waived her rights to marital assets. But if the houses and the IP weren't marital assets, if they were her separate property from before the marriage or held in trusts he didn't own, she hadn't waived anything. She had simply walked away with what was already hers, leaving him with nothing but the debt and the furniture. Give me the phone, Marcus hissed, scrambling for it. He dialed Serafina. The number you have reached has been disconnected. He dialed again. Disconnected. She planned this, Marcus whispered. She planned this whole thing. Who? Jessica asked, annoyed now. Serafina, Marcus screamed, causing the entire restaurant to turn and stare. She played me. She stole my company. Marcus, calm down, Dave said, standing up. Check social media. Maybe she posted something stupid. We can use it against her. Jessica pulled out her phone. She opened Instagram. Her thumb hovered, then scrolled, then stopped. Oh my God, Jessica whispered. What? Marcus demanded, snatching the phone from her hand. It was a post from TMZ. Breaking news. Uploaded 4 minutes ago. The headline read, The $1 billion rebound Serafina Thorn spotted in Monaco hours after divorce filing. Marcus stared at the photo. It was high resolution. It showed the deck of a super yacht, one of those massive floating cities that dwarfed regular boats. The name on the hull was visible in gold lettering, the Leviathan. Sitting on the sun deck wearing a white bikini and holding a glass of vintage Dom Perignon was Serafina. She looked relaxed, radiant. But it was the man sitting next to her that made Marcus's heart stop. The man was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver hair and a physique that spoke of personal trainers and private dojos. He was leaning in, whispering something into Serafina's ear, his hand resting familiarly on her shoulder. Every business student, every tech CEO, every person who read the Wall Street Journal knew that face. It was Julian Vane. Not just a billionaire. The billionaire. The man who owned the shipping lines, the satellite networks, the lithium mines. The man who was rumored to destabilize small governments for tax breaks. A man whose net worth made Marcus Thorne's $400 million look like pocket change. And Marcus realized with a sick twist of his stomach, Julian Vane was known for one other thing. He was the most ruthless corporate raider in the world. He bought companies, stripped them for parts, and left the CEOs destitute. The caption on the photo read, "Sources say Vane and the newly single Mrs. Thorne have been close collaborators for years. Is Thorne Logic the next target?" Marcus looked up at his friends. They were all looking at their phones. They were all looking at him, and for the first time he didn't see admiration in their eyes. He saw fear. Serafina hadn't just left him. She had gone to the Emperor. The Mediterranean sun was beginning to set, casting long, bruising purple shadows across the deck of the Leviathan. The yacht was so large it didn't rock with the waves. It simply displaced the ocean, a sovereign nation of steel and glass. Serafina Thorne. No. Serafina Sterling stood at the railing looking out at the glittering coastline of Monaco. The wind whipped at her hair, but she didn't move to fix it. For the first time in 10 years, she didn't have to be perfect. She just had to be victorious. "He's called 17 times in the last hour," a voice rumbled behind her. Serafina turned. The billionaire, the man the tabloids had identified as her new lover, was sitting in a wicker chair scrolling through a tablet. In the flesh, Sebastian Vane was even more imposing than his photos. He was 62, with eyes like flint and a reputation that made Wall Street bankers wet the bed. Note: the tabloids in Part 2 had misprinted his name as Julian, a common error for lazy journalists, but Marcus knew the truth. This was Sebastian Vane, the merchant of death for failing companies. "Only 17? Serafina asked, taking a sip of her sparkling water. "Marcus is losing his touch. I expected at least 50. "He's distracted," Sebastian said, tapping the screen. "My sources tell me he's currently screaming at his chief technical officer. Apparently they can't access the source code repository for the upcoming 3.0 update." Serafina smiled, a cold, small thing. "They won't be able to. I changed the encryption keys this morning at 9:00 a.m., right before I walked into the arbitration room." Sebastian chuckled, shaking his head. "You are a terrifying woman, Serafina. Remind me never to marry you." "Don't worry, Sebastian. You're safe. Our contract is strictly business." This was the first twist the world didn't know yet. Serafina and Sebastian weren't lovers. They were partners. 6 months ago, Serafina had discovered Marcus's affair with Jessica. She hadn't cried. She hadn't confronted him. Instead, she had gone to the library of their Tribeca home and pulled out the original incorporation binders for Thorne Logic. She traced the paper trail. She realized that Marcus, in his arrogance and laziness, had signed over power of attorney to her in 2015 so she could handle the boring tax stuff while he played visionary. She realized she owned the leverage, but she needed a hammer to swing it. She had met Sebastian Vane at a charity gala 3 years prior. Marcus had ignored Vane, calling him a dinosaur of the old economy. Serafina had spent 2 hours talking to him about supply chain logistics. Vane had been impressed. When she found out about the affair, she called Vane. "I have a company worth 400 million BT," she had told him. "But the CEO is a liability. I want to strip it, gut it, and sell the IP to the highest bidder. I need a partner with capital and a yacht to hide on while the dust settles." Vane had agreed on the spot. Back in New York, the dust wasn't just settling, it was choking Marcus Thorne. Marcus stormed into the server room of Thorne Logic's headquarters in Dumbo, Brooklyn. The room was freezing, filled with the hum of expensive machines. Silas, his CTO, a brilliant but socially anxious coder, was typing furiously, sweat beading on his forehead. "Fix it, Silas," Marcus roared. "Investors are calling me asking why the beta is down. Why can't we push the update?" "I'm trying, Marcus," Silas squeaked. "But the root directory, it's gone. It's been moved." "Moved? How do you move an entire platform?" "I didn't think it was possible, but the admin privileges were transferred at 9:05 a.m. to an external user, Nemesis admin." "Serafina," Marcus hissed. He paced the small room, running his hands through his hair. Okay, it's fine. It's just code. We have backups, right. Restore from the backup." Silas stopped typing. He swiveled his chair around, looking terrified. "Marcus, the backups were stored on the Amazon AWS server." "So, the billing account for the AWS server. It was on Serafina's personal American Express card, the one she used to build credit points for travel." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "And the card was canceled at noon. Amazon wiped the servers for non-payment an hour ago. The backups are gone." Silence descended on the server room. The only sound was the hum of the cooling fans cooling nothing. "Are you telling me?" Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. "That Thorn Logic, a company valued at nearly $500 million, currently consists of nothing but a nice logo and some rented office furniture?" "We have the front-end interface," Silas offered weakly. "The website looks nice. It just doesn't do anything when you click the buttons." Marcus slumped against the server rack. He slid down until he hit the floor. He had signed the divorce settlement. He had agreed that he kept the company and she took nothing. But she hadn't taken nothing. She had taken the soul of the company and left him with the corpse. His phone buzzed. It was Gavin Rourke, the lawyer. "Marcus," Gavin said, his voice hollow, "you need to come to my office. Now." "I can't, Gavin. I'm fixing a technical issue." "Screw the technical issue," Gavin snapped. "I just got a courier packet from Serafina's legal team. It's not just the house and the code, Marcus. It's the loans." Marcus squeezed his eyes shut. "What loans?" "The venture capital injection you took last year. The $50 million from Horizon Ventures to scale the business." "Yeah, I signed that. That's on the company." "Marcus, did you read the fine print on the personal guarantee?" "I don't read fine print, Gavin. That's what I pay you for." "I didn't review that loan," Gavin shouted back. "You said you handled it over a golf game with the partners. I'm looking at the document now. You put up the marital assets as collateral. But since you just signed a divorce decree stating that the houses and the IP are not marital assets but belong to Serafina's separate trusts," Marcus felt the room spinning. "Then the collateral for the $50 million loan defaulted the moment you signed the divorce papers," Gavin finished. "The bank is calling in the loan, Marcus. Immediately. They want $50 million by close of business tomorrow, or they seize your personal liquid assets, your bank accounts, your stock portfolio, everything." Marcus hung up the phone. He looked up at Silas. "Silas," Marcus said, "do we have $50 million in the operating account?" Silas checked the screen. We have 300,000. You spent $4 million last month on the rebranding launch party and the deposit for the Aspen house." Marcus stood up. He walked out of the server room. He walked past the rows of employees, 20-year-olds in hoodies who thought they were working for the next Steve Jobs. He walked into his glass-walled office and locked the door. He looked at the bottle of scotch on his desk. He didn't want a drink. He wanted a time machine. He dialed Serafina again. This time it didn't go to voicemail. "Hello, Marcus." Her voice came through the speaker crisp and clear. He could hear the sound of seagulls in the background. "Sarah," he choked out. "Sarah, please. You've made your point. You win. Just give me the encryption keys. Give me the house back. We can renegotiate." "Renegotiate," Serafina laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was a genuinely amused sound which hurt more. Marcus, you spent 10 years telling me I didn't understand business. You told me I was just a support system. You told me the real work was done by the visionaries. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I was an idiot. Yes, you were. But that's not why I'm doing this. Then why? Marcus screamed. Why destroy everything we built? We didn't build it, Marcus. I built it. You sold it, she said coldly. And then you brought that woman into my bed. You brought her into the house I decorated, drove her in the car I paid off. You thought I was blind because I was quiet. I'll leave her. I'll fire Jessica, I swear. Oh, I don't care about Jessica, Serafina said. She's just a symptom of your disease. The disease is your ego, Marcus, and I'm the cure. Sarah, the bank is calling the loan. I'll be bankrupt. I'll go to jail for fraud. I know, she said soothingly. I sent the tip to the SEC this morning. Good luck, Marcus. I have a dinner reservation. The line went dead. The fall of Marcus Thorne was not a slow decline. It was a cliff dive. By 9:00 a.m. the next morning, less than 24 hours after the silent settlement, the news had broken. The Wall Street Journal ran the piece, Thorne Logic CEO under investigation for securities fraud. Key assets missing. Jessica, the mistress, was the first rat to sense the rising water. She was in the apartment Marcus had rented for her in Soho. She was watching the news on a massive flat-screen TV, eating a kale salad, when the anchor mentioned imminent bankruptcy and seizure of personal assets. Jessica stopped chewing. She looked at the Cartier bracelet on her wrist. Marcus had given it to her last week. If the feds were coming, they would take gifts purchased with illicit funds. Jessica stood up. She went to the safe in the closet. She knew the combination. It was Marcus's birthday. She opened it. Inside were stacks of cash Marcus kept for emergencies, about $50,000. There were also 3 watches and a hard drive. She swept it all into her gym bag. She didn't pack clothes. She didn't leave a note. She called an Uber Black to JFK Airport. She blocked Marcus's number. By the time Marcus got back to the apartment that evening, looking for comfort, the only thing left was a half-eaten salad wilting on the coffee table. But Marcus wasn't at the apartment yet. He was currently in hell. Hell in this case was the boardroom of Thorne Logic. Around the table sat the board of directors. These were men and women who had invested millions into Marcus's vision. They were not happy. Explain this to me like I'm a 5-year-old, Marcus, said Eleanor Vance, the lead investor from Horizon Ventures. She was a woman who could cut glass with her jawline. You divorced your wife. You gave her nothing. And now she owns the company's intellectual property. It's a misunderstanding. Marcus lied, sweat staining the armpits of his dress shirt. It's a clerical error in the patent filing. We're clearing it up. A clerical error? Eleanor threw a file onto the table. I just got off the phone with Serafina's lawyer, or rather the lawyer for Nemesis Holdings. They are offering to license the IP back to us. Marcus blinked. What? She's offering to lease us the code. The code we thought we owned. We can't pay her. Marcus slammed his hand down. That's admitting defeat. We have no choice, Eleanor shouted. Without that code, the product is dead. How much does she want? Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe Serafina just wanted money. Maybe he could buy his way out of this. How much? Eleanor looked at the paper. She looked pale. She wants a licensing fee of $10 million a month. And, Eleanor hesitated. And what? And she wants a seat on the board, the chairperson's seat. That's my seat, Marcus shrieked. Not anymore, Eleanor said quietly. She looked around the table. I move for a vote of no confidence in CEO Marcus Thorne. All in favor. Every hand in the room went up. You're fired, Marcus, Eleanor said. Security will escort you out. Marcus stood there stunned. You can't do this. I'm the founder. You're a liability, Eleanor said. And frankly, it looks like your ex-wife was the brains of the operation all along. We'd rather be in business with her. Two large security guardsmen Marcus had hired, men whose paychecks he signed, stepped forward. One of them took Marcus by the elbow. "Don't touch me," Marcus spat, shaking him off. "I'm leaving." He stormed out of the building carrying a cardboard box with a stapler and a photo of himself shaking hands with Elon Musk. As he walked out onto the cobblestone streets of Dumbo, the paparazzi were waiting. They swarmed him, flashes blinding him. "Marcus, Marcus, is it true you're bankrupt? Did Serafina plan this whole thing? Where is Jessica? Rumors say she was seen boarding a flight to Dubai." Marcus pushed through the crowd, his head down. He reached his Tesla. He tapped his phone to unlock the door. The app spun. "Access denied." He tapped it again. "Access denied. Owner has restricted access." "What?" Marcus yelled at the phone. "I am the owner." Then he remembered. The Tesla was registered to the company he had just been fired from. Eleanor had probably deactivated his digital key 30 seconds ago. Marcus kicked the tire. He kicked it again and again until he was screaming, tears streaming down his face. A billionaire turned beggar in the span of 48 hours. The cameras captured every second of it. Far away in the quiet luxury of the Mediterranean, Serafina watched the live feed on her laptop. Sebastian Vane poured 2 glasses of wine. He handed one to her. "Brutal," Vane noted, watching Marcus kick the car. "Effectively dismantled. The board just issued a press release. They've accepted your licensing terms. You are now the chairperson of Thorn Logic." "I know," Serafina said. She didn't look happy. She didn't look sad. She looked resolved. "So what's the next move?" Vane asked. "You go back to New York, take the throne." "Not yet," Serafina said. "Marcus is broken, but he's not finished. He still has one card left to play." "What card?" "He has no money, no company, no girl." "He has the media," Serafina said. "Marcus is a narcissist. When a narcissist is cornered, they don't just surrender. They try to burn the world down. He's going to go on TV. He's going to try to paint me as the villain. He's going to lie." "Let him," Vane shrugged. "Who will believe him?" "Everyone loves a victim," Serafina said. "Especially if he plays the scorned husband angle right. I need to make sure that when he opens his mouth, no sound comes out." "And how do you do that?" Serafina closed the laptop. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small black flash drive. "Part 2 of the plan," she said. "The mistress wasn't just a wedge to break up the marriage, Sebastian. I knew about Jessica long before I let Marcus know I knew." Vane raised an eyebrow. "You're saying you used her?" "I'm saying," Serafina said, turning the drive over in her fingers, "that Jessica wasn't just a pretty face. She was my spy. She just didn't know it." "You bugged her." "Better," Serafina said. "I introduced them." Sebastian Vane, a man who had toppled governments, looked at Serafina with genuine awe. "You set your husband up with a mistress so you could destroy him." "I set him up with a test," Serafina corrected. "If he had been loyal, nothing would have happened. Jessica would have just been the new intern. But Marcus couldn't resist. And because he couldn't resist, he told her secrets. Pillow talk, Sebastian. It's the most dangerous currency in the world." "And what's on the drive?" "Recordings," Serafina said. "Voice notes. Jessica liked to record their conversations to brag to her friends. She backed them up to the cloud, a cloud I had access to." She stood up, walking to the edge of the yacht. "Marcus is going to try to sue me for fraud. He's going to claim I stole the company. But when the world hears him admitting to tax evasion, bribery, and my personal favorite laughing about how he stole the original code from his college roommate, well," she tossed the flash drive in the air and caught it. "The divorce was the silent part," Serafina said. "Now comes the noise." 3 days after being fired from his own company, Marcus Thorne sat in the green room of the Brad Calver show. It was the most watched cable news program in the country. Calver was a shark, a man who thrived on outrage and scandal. Marcus had chosen this venue carefully. He knew Calver hated woke corporate culture and would eat up the story of a hard-working male genius stripped of his empire by a conniving ex-wife and a shadowy billionaire. Marcus looked in the mirror. He looked tired, but he had told the makeup artist to leave the dark circles. Let them see the pain, he thought. Let them see what she did to me. He smoothed his tie. He had bought this suit at a department store off the rack because his bespoke suits were locked in the Tribeca penthouse he was legally barred from entering. The polyester blend made his skin itch. 5 minutes, Mr. Thorne, a production assistant said, poking her head in. Marcus took a deep breath. This was it. The Hail Mary. If he could win the public, he could pressure the board. He could force a settlement. He could destroy Serafina's reputation before she could fully take the throne. He walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding. The applause was polite but hesitant. "Welcome back," Brad Calver said, leaning over his desk like a bulldog. "We're sitting down with Marcus Thorne, the man who invented Thorne logic, the man who revolutionized data prediction, and the man who 48 hours ago was living on the street while his ex-wife drank champagne on a mega yacht. Marcus, tell us, how did this happen?" Marcus leaned in, putting on his best hurt puppy face. "Brad, it's a tragedy. I trusted her. I spent 10 years building a future for us. I worked 18-hour days while she enjoyed the lifestyle. And when I hit a rough patch, instead of standing by me, she executed a premeditated hostile takeover. It's not just a divorce. It's corporate espionage." "Espionage?" Calver asked, eyes lighting up. "Those are big words." "She stole my intellectual property," Marcus lied effortlessly. "She tricked me into signing documents I didn't understand. She's a con artist, Brad, and she's backed by Sebastian Vane, a man known for destroying American businesses. They are trying to silence me." "Well, you're not silent now," Calver said, turning to the camera. "America, look at this man. This is what happens when the legal system is weaponized against—" Suddenly, the lights in the studio flickered. The massive screen behind Marcus, which had been displaying a flattering photo of him, turned static gray. Then it went black. "What's going on?" Calver snapped at his producers. "We lost the feed." "It's not us," a voice shouted from the control booth. "The signal is being overridden." On the screen a waveform appeared, an audio file. "What is this?" Marcus stood up, panic rising in his throat. "Turn it off!" A voice boomed through the studio speakers. It was unmistakable. It was Marcus's voice. But it wasn't the sad, humble voice he was using now. It was the arrogant, slurring voice of a drunk Marcus recorded months ago in the privacy of his bedroom with Jessica. Recording Marcus. "The investors are such sheep, Jess. I swear. I walk in there, throw around some buzzwords like neural networks and synergy, and they just write the checks." Jessica. "But aren't you worried they'll find out about the code?" Marcus laughing. "Find out what?" "That I didn't write it. Who's going to tell them Toby?" Jessica. "Don't talk about him. It's creepy." Marcus. "It's not creepy. It's business. Toby was a genius, but he was weak. He OD'd Jess. He died in that dorm room and left his laptop open. I didn't kill him. I just rescued his work. I took the hard drive. He didn't need it anymore. I took Atlas, renamed it Thorne Logic, and made $1 billion. It's natural selection." The audio cut. The silence in the studio was absolute. It was heavier than gravity. Brad Calver stared at Marcus. The audience stared at Marcus. Marcus stood frozen, his face draining of color until he looked like a wax figure. "Toby," Marcus whispered to himself. He hadn't thought about Toby in years. Toby Miller, his college roommate at MIT, the quiet kid who wrote code like poetry, the kid who died of a fentanyl overdose in 2014. "You stole it," Calver asked, his voice low. He wasn't playing a character anymore. He was genuinely disgusted. "You stole the code from a dead kid." "It's a deep fake," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking. "AI. It's AI generated. Serafina is doing this. She's framing me." But then the screen behind him changed again. It wasn't audio this time. It was a document. It was a police report from 2014. A campus police evidence log. It listed the items found in Toby Miller's room at the time of death. One laptop missing hard drive, and next to it, a receipt from a pawn shop in Cambridge, dated 2 days after the death. Sold. 1 hard drive. Seller Marcus Thorne. "She has the receipts," someone in the audience whispered loud enough to be heard. "Cut the feed," Marcus yelled, lunging toward the cameras. "Stop filming, I'll sue you all." He tackled a cameraman, knocking the equipment to the floor. The live feed went sideways, showing a blurry angle of Marcus Thorne wrestling with security guards, screaming obscenities. "Get off me!" Marcus howled as 2 burly guards dragged him off the stage. "I am the CEO, I am a visionary!" In the control booth, the producer turned to Brad Calver. "Did we just broadcast that to 5 million people?" Calver nodded slowly. "Yeah. And I think we just won an Emmy." Marcus was thrown out the back exit of the studio into a rain-slicked alleyway. His suit was torn. His shoe was missing. He scrambled up, breathing hard. His phone was vibrating incessantly in his pocket. He pulled it out. 142 missed calls. Text from Mom. "Marcus, is it true? Did you steal from Toby?" Text from Gavin Rourke. "Do not speak to anyone. The FBI is issuing a warrant. I am resigning as your counsel. Good luck." "No, no, no," Marcus hyperventilated. He leaned against the brick wall, sliding down into the trash. The FBI. Securities fraud was one thing, but admitting to theft of IP from a dead man that opened up a decade of lawsuits. The Miller family would come for him. The investors would sue for restitution. He was looking at 20 years in prison. He needed to run, but he had no money. His accounts were frozen. His credit cards were dead. Wait, he froze. The Hamptons house. He remembered something. 3 years ago, during a brief period of paranoia about the market crashing, Marcus had withdrawn $2 million in cash. He had hidden it in the wine cellar of the Hamptons estate behind a false panel in the climate control unit. He never told Serafina. He never told Jessica. It was his apocalypse fund. If he could get to the Hamptons, get the cash, and charter a private boat to the Caribbean, he might have a chance. He pulled his hoodie up. He had found a dirty gray hoodie in a donation bin near the alley and began to walk. He couldn't take a train. There were cameras. He couldn't call a car. He stole a bicycle. It took him 6 hours to bike out of the city, and then he hitchhiked the rest of the way with a truck driver who didn't speak English and didn't watch the news. By the time Marcus reached the Hamptons estate, it was 2 a.m. The massive house stood dark and silent against the crashing waves of the Atlantic. The rain was coming down in sheets now. Marcus hopped the fence. He knew the blind spots in the security cameras. He had installed them. He crept through the manicured gardens, shivering his stolen bike abandoned in the hedges. He reached the cellar doors. They were locked, but Marcus knew the keypad code. 1984. He thought he was Orwellian. The lock clicked. He slipped inside. The air smelled of oak and dust. He pulled out his phone, using the flashlight to navigate through the rows of expensive Bordeaux he could no longer drink. He reached the back wall. He found the climate control unit. With trembling hands, he pried at the false panel. His fingernails broke. He grabbed a wine bottle and smashed the wood. Splinters flew. He ripped the panel away. He reached into the dark cavity. His hand met nothing but air. "No," he whispered. He reached deeper. He felt around frantically. The duffel bag, the $2 million, it had to be there. It was empty. Looking for this. The voice came from everywhere. It was surrounding him. Marcus spun around, dropping his phone. "Who's there?" Suddenly the lights in the cellar blazed on. Marcus covered his eyes, blinded. At the top of the cellar stairs, sitting on a wooden crate, was a laptop. The screen was open. On the screen was a live video feed. It was Serafina. She was sitting in the cabin of the yacht wearing a silk robe. She looked warm. She looked comfortable. And she was holding a stack of $100 bills, fanning herself with them. "Sarah," Marcus gasped. You took it." "I took it 3 years ago, Marcus," Serafina said through the speakers. "Did you really think I didn't notice you withdrawing $2 million? I handle the accounts. I saw the withdrawal. I followed you. I watched you hide it. You let me think it was there. I needed you to have a destination," she said. "I knew that when the world collapsed, you'd run to your little safety net, like a rat to cheese." "Why?" Marcus sobbed, falling to his knees on the cold concrete. "Why torture me? Just call the cops." "I didn't call the cops, Marcus," she said softly. "I called someone else." "Who?" "Toby's mother." Marcus stopped breathing. "Mrs. Miller," he whispered. "She's a lovely woman," Serafina said. "She lives in Ohio. She's been mourning her son for 10 years, thinking he was just a junkie who threw his life away. She didn't know he was a genius. She didn't know his best friend stole his legacy." "Sarah, please." "I sent her the recordings, Marcus. And I sent her the location of this house. I told her you might be stopping by." "She's here." Marcus looked up at the cellar stairs, terrified. "No," Serafina said. "She's too old to travel that fast. But she has a lawyer, a very aggressive lawyer, and they called the local police to report a trespasser on the property, a property which, as you know, belongs to Nemesis Holdings." Sirens began to wail in the distance, getting closer. "You set me up," Marcus said, defeat washing over him. "I corrected the balance," Serafina corrected. "You built a castle on San Marcos. I just waited for the tide to come in." Marcus looked at the screen, at the woman he had underestimated for a decade. He realized now that the silence during the divorce wasn't submission. It was the deep breath a sniper takes before pulling the trigger. "Who are you?" Marcus asked. "You're not the woman I married." "No," Serafina said, leaning into the camera. Her eyes were hard as diamonds. "The woman you married was a role I played, a role you wrote for me, the dutiful wife, the shadow. But you forgot one thing about shadows, Marcus." "What?" "They get longer when the sun goes down, and it is very dark for you now." The cellar doors burst open. "Police, show me your hands." Flashlights cut through the gloom. Officers swarmed down the stairs, guns drawn. Marcus raised his hands. He looked back at the laptop screen. Serafina raised her glass of champagne. "Goodbye, Marcus." The screen went black. 18 months later, the sound of the heavy steel door slamming shut was the only clock Marcus Thorne had left. Inside the Federal Correctional Institution at Otisville, New York, time didn't move in hours or minutes. It moved in counts. The morning count, the lunch count, the evening count. Marcus sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at a blank composition notebook. He had been trying to write his memoir for 6 months. He had a title, The Icarus Algorithm: How I Built the Future and Was Robbed by the Past. But every time he put the cheap pen to the paper, his hand shook. He wasn't the Wolf of Wall Street. He wasn't a glamorous outlaw. In prison, he was a joke. The other inmates, mostly fraudsters and drug traffickers, called him tech support. If the TV in the common room broke, they made Marcus fix it. If the remote stopped working, they threw it at his head. He had lost everything. The money was gone, seized by the SEC and the banks. The houses were sold. Jessica was currently starring in a reality TV show called Gold Digger Island, where she openly mocked his performance in bed to millions of viewers. But the worst part wasn't the poverty or the humiliation. It was the silence. Marcus used to be surrounded by noise, applause, notification pings, Yes men laughing at his jokes. Now the world had simply muted him. He had sent 20 letters to Serafina. He had begged for forgiveness. He had begged for a loan. He had begged just to hear her voice. She had never replied, not once. Her silence was a prison wall thicker than the concrete around him. "Thorn!" a guard shouted, banging his baton against the bars. "TV time. You comin'?" Marcus sighed. "No, I'm writing." "Suit yourself. You're missing it. Your ex is on Bloomberg." Marcus dropped the pen. He scrambled to the bars. "What?" He ran out into the common room. A group of inmates were gathered around the small mounted television eating commissary popcorn. On the screen, the headline banner flashed in bold blue, "The New Era of Ethical AE, Serafina Sterling, Keynote, Live from Zurich." Marcus pushed past a convicted embezzler to get a better look. Serafina stood on a stage that looked like a spaceship. The lighting was soft, ethereal. She wasn't wearing the severe business suits anymore. She wore a white silk suit that flowed like water. She looked younger. She looked powerful. She looked happy. She was speaking to a crowd of 3,000 of the world's most powerful leaders. "For a decade," Serafina said, her voice calm and resonant, "we were told that technology requires disruption, that to build something great you have to break things, you have to break rules, you have to break people." The camera panned to the front row. Sebastian Vane was there, looking proud. Next to him sat an elderly woman with gray hair and thick glasses. Marcus recognized her instantly. It was Mrs. Miller, Toby's mother. "But that was a lie," Serafina continued. "Real innovation isn't about theft. It isn't about speed at the cost of truth. Today I am proud to announce the retirement of the Thorn Logic brand." The crowd murmured. Marcus gripped the back of a plastic chair so hard his knuckles turned white. "Don't you dare," he thought. "Don't you erase my name." "The name Thorn represents a legacy of ego," Serafina said. "It represents a black box where credit goes in and lies come out. Today, we are rebranding. We are releasing the source code back to the academic community, and we are launching a new platform dedicated to transparent open-source data prediction." Behind her, the massive screen changed. The logo of Thorn Logic, a sharp, aggressive T, shattered into digital dust. In its place, a new logo formed, a simple, elegant geometric design, and the name, the Miller Foundation. "We are naming the company after its true architect," Serafina said, gesturing to Mrs. Miller in the front row. The old woman was weeping, holding Sebastian Vane's hand. "All profits from the Miller platform will go toward funding STEM education for underprivileged students and supporting addiction recovery programs. We are not here to make billionaires. We are here to make amends." The crowd exploded. It wasn't polite applause. It was a standing ovation, a roar of approval that shook the speakers of the prison TV. Marcus stared at the screen. She had done the one thing he couldn't conceive of. She hadn't just taken the money. She hadn't just taken the power. She had given it away. She had destroyed his legacy not by stealing it, but by proving it was worthless compared to the truth. "Damn, Thorn," the inmate next to him laughed, slapping Marcus on the back. "She just flushed your name down the toilet and got a tax write-off for it. That's cold. That's ice cold." On the screen, a reporter thrust a microphone toward Serafina as she walked off stage. "Ms. Sterling, Ms. Sterling, do you have any comment for your ex-husband? He's currently serving 5 years in federal prison. Do you have anything you want to say to him?" Serafina stopped. She looked directly into the camera lens. For a second, Marcus felt like she was looking right into his soul, seeing the dirty prison jumpsuit, the graying hair, the desperation. She paused. The world held its breath, waiting for an insult, a gloat, a moment of vindication. Serafina smiled, a small enigmatic curve of her lips. "No," she said, and then she turned and walked away. The screen cut to a commercial for car insurance. Marcus stood there as the other inmates laughed and dispersed. He looked down at his hands. He realized he was shaking. She hadn't argued during the divorce. She hadn't argued during the takeover. And she wouldn't argue now. She had granted him the ultimate punishment. She had made him irrelevant. 3 months later, a package arrived at the prison mailroom. It was a standard padded envelope. The return address was Nemesis Holdings, Cayman Islands. Marcus tore it open with his teeth, his heart hammering. Was it money? Was it a letter? Was it a sign that she still cared even a little? He dumped the contents onto his cot. It was a book, a first-edition copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. There was no note. There was no inscription. Just a yellow sticky note on the cover with a single hand-drawn symbol, a smiley face. Marcus stared at the book. He touched the cover, and for the first time in 2 years, he started to laugh. He laughed until his ribs hurt. He laughed until the tears ran down his face and soaked the prison sheets. He laughed because he finally understood the joke. He was never the main character of this story. He was just the villain in her origin story. And the villain never gets the last word. The end. And that is the story of the silent settlement. Serafina Sterling proved that in a world full of noise-screaming matches and Twitter wars, the most dangerous weapon you can wield is silence. Marcus Thorne thought his wife was weak because she didn't fight back. He didn't realize that while he was playing checkers, she was playing 4D chess and she owned the board. She walked away with her dignity, her freedom, and eventually the entire empire, leaving him with nothing but his own ego to keep him company in a cell. It's a brutal reminder. Be careful who you underestimate. The quiet ones aren't quiet because they have nothing to say. They're quiet because they're plotting. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate karma, smash that like button right now. It helps the channel grow. And tell me in the comments, would you have taken the money? Or would you have destroyed the legacy like Serafina did? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next crazy true story. Thanks for watching.
The courtroom went dead silent as Brick Sterling leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. He thought he had won. He thought stripping his wife Calla of her home, her dignity, and her finances was the final victory in his sordid game of betrayal. He had the high-priced lawyers, the forged evidence, and the mistress waiting in the wings. But Brick made one fatal calculation error. He mistook Calla's silence for weakness. He didn't know that the poor orphan he married was the sole heir to the very capital firm that owned his company. And sitting in the back row, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, was the man who could destroy Brick with a single signature, Calla's uncle. This is the story of how an arrogant CEO lost everything in a single afternoon. The atmosphere inside courtroom 4B of the Superior Court of New York was stifling. It smelled of old wood polish, stale coffee, and the sharp metallic tang of imminent ruin. Outside, the autumn rain battered the windows, a grey backdrop to the brutal dismantling of a marriage that was taking place inside. Brick Sterling sat at the plaintiff's table, impeccably dressed in a bespoke navy suit that likely cost more than most people's cars. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe, with an air of bored impatience. To him, this wasn't a tragedy. It was a transaction. A business deal gone sour that needed to be liquidated so he could move on to the next investment. Across the aisle sat Calla. She looked nothing like the vibrant woman who had graced the society pages 3 years ago as the Cinderella bride. Today she wore a simple grey cardigan and black slacks. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she kept her eyes fixed on the mahogany grain of the table before her. She looked defeated, small, insignificant, exactly how Brick wanted her. "Your Honor," boomed Brick's lawyer, a man named Richard Blackwood, who was known in the city as the Vulture. He paced before Judge Thaddeus Moore, gesturing theatrically toward Calla. We are not just asking for a dissolution of marriage. We are asking for justice. My client, Mr. Sterling, has been the victim of a sophisticated fraud. Judge Moore, a man with bushy grey eyebrows and a low tolerance for theatrics, peered over his glasses. Fraud is a strong word, Mr. Blackwood. This is a divorce hearing. It is the only word that fits your honor. Blackwood pressed his voice, dripping with mock sympathy. The defendant Calla Vance presented herself as a woman of virtue, a supportive partner. Instead, she has proven to be a leech, a woman who married Mr. Sterling solely for his assets, contributed nothing to his empire, and as we will demonstrate, attempted to siphon funds from Sterling Tech into private offshore accounts. A murmur rippled through the gallery. In the back row, Isabella Thorne sat with her legs crossed, wearing a bright red dress that was entirely inappropriate for court. She was Brick's executive assistant, a title that fooled absolutely no one. She caught Brick's eye and offered a subtle, predatory smile. Calla didn't flinch. She didn't object. She just sat there, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. My client, Blackwood continued, ramping up the volume, built Sterling Tech from the ground up. He is a self-made visionary. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps to create a company valued at $400 million. Ms. Vance, on the other hand, was a waitress when he found her. He gave her a life of luxury. He gave her a world she could never have dreamed of. And how did she repay him? With infidelity and embezzlement. Brick leaned forward, whispering loudly enough for the court reporter to hear. Just get it over with, Richard. I want her out of my life by lunch. The cruelty was casual, practiced. It was the same tone he had used 3 weeks ago when he had thrown Calla out of their penthouse. Flashback. It had been raining then too. Brick had stood by the door, Isabella clinging to his arm. Get out, he had said, tossing Calla's suitcase onto the wet pavement of the private driveway. The locks are changed. The cards are cancelled. You're nothing, Ellie. You were nothing when I met you, and you're nothing now. Isabella had laughed, a cold, tinkling sound. Don't worry, honey. I'll take good care of the master bedroom. Back in the courtroom, Blackwood slammed a heavy binder onto the judge's bench. Exhibit A, Your Honor. Bank statements showing unauthorized transfers. We are petitioning for a complete nullification of the prenuptial agreement's payout clause due to a breach of good faith. Mr. Sterling is willing to offer a one-time charity payment of $5,000 to help Ms. Vance find a motel. Beyond that, she deserves nothing. $5,000. From a man whose company she had quietly helped nurture during his darkest depressive episodes. From a man whose social standing she had secured with her grace and etiquette. The judge looked at the binder, then at Calla. Ms. Vance, Judge Moore said, his voice stern. You are representing yourself today. Your previous counsel withdrew. Calla finally looked up. Her eyes were clear blue and terrifyingly calm. Mr. Blackwood threatened my previous attorney with disbarment over a fabricated conflict of interest. Your Honor, I couldn't afford another retainer after Brick froze our joint accounts. So yes, I am representing myself. And how do you respond to these allegations? The judge asked. Calla stood up. She didn't shake. I deny them, Your Honor. But more importantly, I believe Mr. Blackwood is operating under a fundamental misunderstanding of the facts. Brick scoffed an audible sound that echoed in the room. She's going to cry, he muttered to Blackwood. Here comes the sob story about her difficult childhood. The misunderstanding, Calla continued, her voice gaining strength, is regarding the true ownership of Sterling Tech and who exactly brought the capital to the marriage. Blackwood laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "Your Honor, this is delusional. The woman was a waitress at a diner in Brooklyn. My client is the CEO." "Is he?" Calla asked softly. "Order." Judge Moore banged his gavel, silencing the snickers coming from Isabella's section of the gallery. "Ms. Vance, proceed. But be warned, I have a full docket today. If this is a stalling tactic, it will not end well for you." "It is not a stall, Your Honor," Calla said, walking slowly toward the witness stand where the clerk was organizing files. "Mr. Blackwood claims I am a gold digger. He claims I embezzled money. May I see the proofs?" Blackwood smirked and handed her a copy of the binder. "Read it and weep, darling. It's all there. The transfers to the Cayman Islands. The dates coincide with your solo trips to visit your sick aunt." Calla opened the binder. She flipped through the pages with a practiced eye. Fake wire transfers, forged signatures. It was a sloppy job likely put together by Brick's corrupt CFO, a man named Greg Halloway, who would do anything for a bonus. "Brick," Calla said, turning to face her husband directly. This was a breach of protocol, but the judge didn't stop her. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice that these transfer codes are outdated? SWIFT codes changed for the Cayman branch 6 months before these dates." Brick stiffened. "Objection," Blackwood shouted. "The defendant is not a forensic accountant." "No," Calla said, closing the binder. "But I am the one who taught Brick how to read a balance sheet." "Lies." Brick stood up, his face flushing red. "You were a college dropout. I found you serving coffee. I made you." "You found me serving coffee because I was researching," Calla said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. "I was trying to understand the lives of the people my family employs. I wanted to be grounded before I took on my responsibilities." "Your family?" Brick laughed, looking around the courtroom as if inviting everyone to share the joke. "Your family is dead, Ellie. You told me yourself. Parents died in a car crash. No siblings. You're a stray." "My parents are dead," Calla confirmed. A flash of pain crossed her face, but she suppressed it instantly. "That part was true. But I never told you I didn't have family. You just never asked. You were always too busy talking about yourself, Brick. In 3 years of marriage, you never once asked what my mother's maiden name was." "Who cares what her maiden name was?" Blackwood interrupted, sensing the shift in the room's energy and trying to regain control. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. We have proof of theft. We have proof of moral turpitude." Blackwood pulled out a second document. "We also have sworn affidavits from staff members stating that Ms. Vance was abusive to household employees." Calla sighed. "Affidavits signed by the staff you hired last month." "Brick, after you fired the housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, who had been with us for 2 years, because she refused to lie for you." "Your Honor," Blackwood shouted. "Enough." Judge Moore rubbed his temples. "Ms. Vance, you are making vague allusions to family and ownership. Do you have evidence to refute these financial claims, or are you just wasting the court's time?" "I have a witness, Your Honor," Calla said. "A witness?" Brick sneered. "Who, the fry cook from the diner?" "No," Calla said. She turned toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. "I call Sir Arthur Kingsley to the stand." The silence that followed was absolute. The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Even Judge Moore looked up sharply. Sir Arthur Kingsley was not just a name. He was an institution, He was the head of Kingsley Global, a venture capital firm based in London that controlled assets larger than the GDP of some small countries. He was a recluse, a man who rarely appeared in public, and certainly never in a low-level divorce court in New York. Brick froze. His face went pale. He knew the name. Everyone in business knew the name. Kingsley Global was the silent angel investor that had saved Sterling Tech from bankruptcy 5 years ago. It was Kingsley Global that held the controlling 51% voting rights in Brick's company rights they had always let Brick manage by proxy. Sir Arthur Kingsley, Judge Moore asked, skeptical. You expect us to believe the Knight of the British Realm is here? He is, Calla said. The double doors groaned open. 2 large men in dark suits stepped in, first scanning the room. Then an older man walked in. He was in his 60s, leaning on a cane with a silver handle shaped like a lion's head. He wore a 3-piece tweed suit that looked timeless and expensive. He had a shock of white hair and eyes that were the exact same shade of piercing blue as Calla's. The air in the room seemed to be sucked out. Isabella Thorne stopped chewing her gum. Brick Sterling slumped in his chair, his mouth slightly open. The old man walked down the center aisle, the tap-tap-tap of his cane echoing on the floorboards. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at Brick. He looked solely at Calla. He reached the defense table, stopped, and bowed his head slightly to her. I apologize for the delay, my dear. The man said, his voice a rich baritone that carried effortlessly. Traffic on the bridge was dreadful. I assume this individual hasn't bored you to death yet. Calla smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed her face. Hello, Uncle Arthur. Uncle. Brick whispered the word escaping his lips like a dying breath. Mr. Blackwood, the shark lawyer, looked as if he had just swallowed a hook. He scrambled to his feet. Objection. This is highly irregular. This man is not on the witness list. I am not a witness, Sir Arthur said, turning slowly to face the trembling lawyer. I am an interested party, and I am the owner of the company you seem to think your client built. Judge Moore looked at the docket, then at Sir Arthur. Sir Arthur, if you are indeed who you say you are, this changes the jurisdiction of the assets entirely. I have the incorporation papers here, Arthur said, snapping his fingers. One of his bodyguards placed a thick briefcase on the table. And the trust documents. You see, Your Honor, Sterling Tech was not built on Mr. Sterling's genius. It was built on the Kingsley family trust. Specifically the trust belonging to my niece, Lady Calla Vance Kingsley. Lady, Isabella gasped from the back row. Brick looked at Calla, his eyes wide with horror. Lady. Calla turned to him, her expression cool and detached. I told you, Brick. You never asked about my mother. Her name was Victoria Kingsley, and you didn't marry a waitress. You married the woman who signed your paychecks. The courtroom buzzed with the kind of chaotic energy usually reserved for a boxing match, not a divorce hearing. Judge Moore banged his gavel, the sharp cracks cutting through the murmurs, but his eyes remained fixed on the documents Sir Arthur had placed on the bench. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Moore said, his voice dangerously low, are you aware of the corporate structure detailed in these documents? Richard Blackwood was sweating. The sheen of perspiration on his forehead was visible even from the gallery. He flipped through his own papers, his hands trembling slightly. Your Honor, these are surprise exhibits. We haven't had time to authenticate. They are notarized by the High Court of London and the Secretary of State, Judge Moore snapped. According to this, Sterling Tech is a subsidiary of Vance Holdings, which is a shell company fully owned by the Kingsley Trust. Mr. Sterling owns, let me see here, exactly 2% of the shares. The rest are held in his name as a proxy for the trust. Brick stood up, his legs wobbly. That's a lie. I built that company. I signed the deals. Sir Arthur turned, leaning heavily on his cane, but looking like a titan. You signed the papers I put in front of you, boy. Do you remember 5 years ago you were drowning in debt from that failed cryptocurrency venture? You were going to lose your apartment. You met Calla a week later. You thought she was a pretty waitress who could comfort you. In reality, she saw potential in your software code, despite your incompetence as a businessman. Calla stepped forward, picking up the narrative. I petitioned the trust to bail you out, Brick. I believed in the product. But my uncle didn't trust you. So we made a deal. The trust would buy the debt and capitalize the company, but the ownership would remain with me until I deemed you safe. You were never the CEO, Brick. You were a glorified employee with a fancy title and a proxy vote. And the embezzlement, Brick croaked, pointing a shaking finger at the binder of evidence his lawyer had presented earlier. She stole $3 million. The transfers are right there. Calla walked over to the plaintiff's table. She looked down at Brick with pity. Open page 14 of your own evidence binder. Brick. Brick didn't move. Blackwood opened it. Read the destination of the funds, Calla commanded. Blackwood adjusted his glasses. Beneficiary, Orion Gaming Liquidation Fund. Does that ring a bell, Brick? Calla asked softly. The color drained from Brick's face. Last year, Calla addressed the judge, Mr. Sterling developed a gambling problem. High-stakes poker in Macau and underground games in Jersey. He racked up $3 million in debt to people who don't send invoices. They send bone breakers. He was terrified. He came home crying one night, claiming he had made a bad investment. I knew the truth. I withdrew the money from my trust allowance, not the company accounts, to pay off his debt so he wouldn't be killed. I routed it through the company so it would look like a business loss write-off to save his reputation. The courtroom gasped. I saved your life, Calla whispered, her voice trembling with the first sign of real emotion. I stripped my own savings to keep your kneecaps intact, and you used that transfer as proof that I was stealing from you. Brick slumped back into his chair. He looked like a deflated balloon. The narrative he had constructed, the self-made man and the leeching wife, had just been incinerated. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Moore said, closing the file, it appears your client has committed perjury by filing a false financial statement. And frankly, if these trust documents hold up, Mr. Sterling doesn't have any assets to divide. He is essentially an employee facing termination. Wait, Brick said, a sudden desperate light entering his eyes. The prenup. The prenup is ironclad. It says any appreciation of assets during the marriage is split 50-50. Even if she owns the company, the value went up. I'm entitled to half the growth. Isabella in the back perked up. Half of $1 billion growth was still a fortune. Calla smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. I was hoping you would bring up the prenup, Brick. Calla walked back to her table and pulled out a single sheet of paper, the original prenuptial agreement. You were so insistent on this, Brick, Calla said, holding the paper up. Do you remember? You made me sign it 3 days before the wedding. You told me, I need to protect my empire from gold diggers. You didn't let me have a lawyer review it. You said if I loved you, I'd sign. And you did, Brick spat. You signed it. 50-50 on asset growth. That's the law. Actually, Calla said, I did read it, and I noticed a clause your previous lawyer, the one you fired for being too expensive, inserted. Clause 14, Section B, the infidelity forfeiture clause. Blackwood froze. He began frantically flipping through his copy of the prenup. You see, Calla explained to the rapt audience, Brick was so arrogant, so sure that I would be the one to cheat on him, the poor waitress looking for a better deal, that he insisted on a clause stating that if either party is proven to have committed adultery, they forfeit all claims to marital assets and are liable for the other party's legal fees. But you can't prove I cheated, Brick yelled. Isabella is my assistant. You have no proof. Isabella shrank down in her seat, trying to become invisible. Oh, I think we do, Sir Arthur interrupted. He gestured to the large screen mounted on the courtroom wall, usually used for displaying evidence diagrams. If I may, Your Honour, a submission from a private investigator hired by the Kingsley Trust. Judge Moore nodded. Proceed. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't grainy footage or blurry photos. It was crystal clear 4K video. The video showed the interior of the Sterling Tech private elevator. The timestamp was from 2 weeks prior, the day before Brick had kicked Calla out. In the video, Brick and Isabella were clearly intimate. They were laughing. Audio from the video played over the speakers. Brick, I'm tossing her out tomorrow. The lawyers have the papers ready. Isabella, finally, I'm sick of sneaking around. Are you sure she won't get half Brick? She won't get a dime. She's stupid, Izzy. She doesn't understand money. I'll give her $5,000 and she'll probably thank me. Then the penthouse is yours. The video froze on Brick's laughing face. In the courtroom, the silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of Isabella Thorne grabbing her purse and sprinting out the back door. The click-clack of her heels fading away was the sound of Brick's support system vanishing. Isabella, Brick shouted, turning around. But she was gone. Clause 14, Section B, Calla read aloud. In the event of infidelity, the offending party forfeits all rights to asset appreciation and alimony. Furthermore, the offending party must vacate all shared residences immediately. Judge Moore looked at Brick with undisguised disgust. Mr. Sterling, it seems you drafted the instrument of your own destruction. The court finds the prenuptial agreement valid and enforceable against the plaintiff. This can't be happening, Brick stammered. He looked at Blackwood. Do something, fix this. Blackwood began packing his briefcase. Mr. Sterling, my retainer covers divorce representation. It does not cover defending against fraud charges or perjury. And considering your assets have just been revealed to be non-existent, I doubt you can afford my hourly rate for the remainder of this hearing. You're leaving? Brick gasped. I'm mitigating my losses, Blackwood said, snapping his briefcase shut. Good luck, Brick. As the lawyer walked out, Brick sat alone at the large table. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the punishment. I'm not done, Sir Arthur said from the witness stand. Your Honour, the divorce is one matter, but there is the matter of the company. Sir Arthur Kingsley didn't need a boardroom. He turned the courtroom into his office. He pulled a sleek black satellite phone from his pocket. Sir Arthur, no phones in court, Judge Moore warned, though half-heartedly. Forgive me, Your Honour, but this is relevant to the defendant's financial status, which is central to the case. Arthur put the phone on speaker and held it up. Connect me to the Sterling Tech Board of Directors. Emergency override code Kingsley Alpha 1. A robotic voice confirmed the code, and within seconds, A series of beeps indicated a conference call had been connected. Voices clamored on the line. "This is the board," a shaky voice said. It was Greg Holloway, the CFO, who had helped Brick forge the documents. "Who is this?" "This is Sir Arthur Kingsley," the old man boomed. "I am currently in New York Superior Court with your CEO, Brick Sterling." "Sir Arthur," Holloway's voice cracked. We weren't expecting." "Clearly." Arthur cut him off. "I am enacting Article 5 of the Incorporation Charter. Immediate removal of the CEO due to gross misconduct, public reputational damage and fraud." Brick jumped up, grabbing the edge of the table. "You can't do that. The board loves me. I made them rich." "The board," Arthur said into the phone, "will vote now. All in favor of removing Brick Sterling effective immediately and stripping him of all stock options." "Yes," Holloway said instantly. "Yes," said another voice. "Yes, yes." It was unanimous. The rats were fleeing the sinking ship. "Brick Sterling is fired," Arthur announced to the room. "Furthermore, Mr. Holloway, you are to lock Mr. Sterling's corporate access badges and wipe his devices remotely, right now." Brick pulled his phone out of his pocket. The screen went black. A white spinning wheel appeared, followed by a factory reset icon. All his contacts, his emails, his access to his bank accounts wiped in seconds. No. Brick tapped the screen frantically. "My crypto wallet keys were in the Notes app. You just deleted $300,000 in Bitcoin." "Consider it a severance tax," Arthur said dryly. Judge Moore cleared his throat. "The court has heard enough. I am granting the dissolution of marriage. Vance retains full ownership of all properties and assets held in the trust. Mr. Sterling is ordered to vacate the premises of the marital home by—" The judge looked at the clock. "Well, since he locked Ms. Vance out 3 weeks ago, I'd say immediate eviction is fair. Ms. Vance, do you want the police to escort him to retrieve his personal effects?" Calla stood up. She looked tall, elegant, and powerful. She looked at Brick, who was staring at his blank phone, trembling. "No, Your Honor," Calla said. "I don't want him in the house at all. He can have whatever is in his pockets. Everything inside the penthouse, the clothes, the watches, the art was bought with my family's money. It stays." "But my suits," Brick whimpered. "I have nowhere to go." "You have $5,000, Calla reminded him, echoing his cruelty from 3 weeks ago. "I suggest you find a motel. I hear the ones in Queens have vacancies." She turned to the bailiff. "Can we have him removed? He's trespassing on my time." 2 bailiffs moved toward Brick. He looked around the room, hoping for a friendly face. There were none. Even the court reporter looked at him with disdain. "Ellie, please," Brick begged, as the bailiff took his arm. "I'm sorry. I got caught up in the stress. I love you. We can work this out. I'm a visionary. You need me to run the company." "I already hired a new CEO this morning," Calla said calmly. "She starts Monday. Goodbye, Brick." Brick blurted out, as he was dragged toward the doors. "Yes, Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper you fired. Turns out she has a PhD in operations management she never told you about. She's much more qualified than you." The doors swung shut behind Brick, cutting off his protests. The courtroom was silent for a moment. Then Judge Moore capped his pen. "Case closed," he said. "Ms. Vance, or should I say, Lady Kingsley, welcome back to your life." But the story wasn't over. Brick was down, but a man with that much pride doesn't vanish quietly, and karma wasn't done with him yet. The heavy oak doors of the Superior Court closed behind Brick Sterling, with a finality that felt like a coffin lid slamming shut. For the first 10 minutes, he simply stood under the courthouse awning, staring at the deluge of rain hammering the New York pavement. He reached into his pocket for his smartphone, a reflex honed over a decade of constant connectivity, only to pull out the factory reset device. It was a sleek black slab of glass that was now utterly useless. No contacts, no banking apps, no Uber. No way to call the driver who was supposed to be waiting for him. "Move along, pal," a court security officer muttered, nudging Brick's shoulder. "You can't loiter here. The media is setting up for the next trial." Brick stumbled out into the rain. The water soaked through his bespoke Italian wool suit, instantly turning the fabric heavy and cold. He raised a hand to hail a yellow taxi, something he hadn't done since he was 22. But 3 cabs sped past him, their occupied lights glowing like taunts. When one finally pulled over the driver, a man with a thick beard and tired eyes took one look at Brick's soaking wet, frantic appearance and kept the window rolled up halfway. "Cash only," the driver shouted over the rain. "Card machine is broken." Brick patted his pockets. He had the debit card the bailiff had handed him, the one with Callah's charity, of $5,000, but he had no cash. I need to get to a bank," Brick stammered. "I'm Brick Sterling. I'll pay you triple once we get there." The driver scoffed. "Yeah, and I'm the King of England. Walk, buddy." The taxi screeched away, splashing a wave of dirty gutter water onto Brick's trousers. He ended up walking. He walked 40 blocks north, his expensive leather dress shoes, designed for boardrooms and carpets, blistering his heels with every step. He wasn't just walking toward shelter. He was walking toward the only lifeline he thought he had left. He headed for the Upper East Side, to the penthouse of Brad Salinger. Brad was a hedge fund manager, a drinking buddy, and a man Brick had personally enriched with insider tips on tech mergers for years. They were brothers. They had toasted to their own genius on yachts in the Mediterranean. Brad would help. He had to. When Brick arrived at the gilded entrance of the Kensington, he looked like a drowned rat. His hair was plastered to his skull and his suit was ruined. The doorman, a man named Henry, whom Brick had tipped hundreds of dollars to in the past, blocked the revolving door with a gloved hand. "I'm here to see Mr. Salinger," Brick gasped, wiping water from his eyes. "It's an emergency. Tell him it's Brick." Henry didn't move. He didn't smile. He picked up the lobby phone, turned his back to Brick, and spoke in a hushed tone. A moment later he hung up and turned back to the glass. "Mr. Salinger is not accepting visitors," Henry said, his voice muffled by the thick glass. "Tell him it's Brick," Brick screamed, slamming his palm against the door. "I gave him the tip on the Omnicorp merger. He owes me." Henry opened the door just a crack, sliding a small envelope through. "Mr. Salinger asked me to give you this, and he said if you don't leave the premises in 30 seconds, he is authorized to call the precinct." Brick tore the envelope open with trembling fingers. Inside was a single, crisp $20 bill and a business card for a homeless shelter in the Bronx. Brick stared at the money. The insult was so sharp, it felt like a physical stab wound. Brad wasn't just rejecting him, he was erasing him. To men like Brad, friendship was a transaction. Brick was no longer an asset, he was a liability. A walking contagion of bad PR. He dropped the $20 into a puddle and turned away, the shame burning hotter than the cold rain. That night, Brick checked into the Starlight Motel in Queens. It was the only place he could find that accepted a walk-in with no luggage and a debit card that required 3 authorization attempts to go through. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial-strength lemon cleaner, a scent that would haunt him for years. He sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, stripping off his wet socks. He was hungry, starving actually, but the idea of going out to find food was impossible. He felt exposed as if the word fraud was tattooed on his forehead. He turned on the small boxy television bolted to the dresser. He needed to know how bad it was. He flipped to CNBC. The headline on the ticker at the bottom of the screen made his blood run cold. Sterling Tech shares surge 12% after ousting of CEO. Brick scrambled off the bed, kneeling in front of the TV. "It's a remarkable turnaround," a sleek-haired financial analyst was saying. "Wall Street has reacted with overwhelming positivity to the news that Brick Sterling has been removed. For years there were rumors that Sterling was merely a figurehead, and today's revelation that the Kingsley Trust, and specifically Lady Calla Vance, holds the controlling interest has restored immense confidence. The market loves stability, and frankly they love that the dead weight is gone." "Dead weight," Brick whispered. "I built that code. I pulled the all-nighters." But the news got worse. "In related news," the anchor continued, "the district attorney's office has announced a formal investigation into the embezzlement allegations. Sources say former CFO Greg Holloway is cooperating fully in exchange for immunity. Holloway has allegedly provided hard drives containing evidence of wire fraud and digital asset manipulation." Brick collapsed back onto the floor. The hard drives. He had thought Greg was loyal. He had paid Greg's mortgage off 2 years ago as a bonus. But loyalty, Brick was learning, was a luxury only the rich could afford. Then a sudden horrifying realization hit him. His crypto wallets. He scrambled for his factory reset phone. He had kept his private keys, the long, complex passwords, to access his Bitcoin and Ethereum stashes in the Secure Notes app on his phone. He had never written them down on paper because he was paranoid about physical theft. He thought the cloud was safe. But Sir Arthur had wiped the device. Brick tapped the screen, frantically reinstalling the app, praying for a backup. Login failed. Account not found. He tried again. And again. Account wiped by administrator. $300,000. His escape fund. His safety net. It was gone. Deleted in a microsecond by an old man with a cane. The money existed somewhere in the blockchain ether, locked in a digital vault that Brick could never open again. He was locked out of his own life. The next 3 weeks were a slow-motion car crash. Brick hired a lawyer he found on a bus bench at a man named Saul Berkowitz, whose office was above a laundromat. Saul smelled of onions and seemed more interested in Brick's watch than his case. "Here's the deal," Saul said, chewing on a toothpick. "You sell the Patek Philippe that covers my retainer. But looking at this, Holloway sang like a canary, kid. They have the IP addresses. They have the bank transfers. You're looking at 5 to 10 years for wire fraud." "I can't go to prison," Brick whispered. I'm not built for that." "Then you need to pay restitution," Saul said. "You pay back the $3 million you borrowed for the gambling debts, and maybe we can get it plead down to a misdemeanor and probation. Do you have $3 million? "I have $4,000 left," Brick said. Saul shrugged. "Then you better find a job, a good one." Brick tried. God, he tried. He bought a cheap suit from a thrift store that smelled of mothballs and hit the pavement. He still had his MBA. He still had his experience. Surely someone would see past the scandal. He landed an interview at a mid-sized logistics firm in Jersey City. The hiring manager was a woman named Karen. who he realized with a jolt of horror he had once berated at a tech conference 3 years ago for blocking the buffet line. She recognized him immediately. "Brick Sterling," she said, leaning back in her chair, a cruel smile playing on her lips. The man who said, "Logistics is for people who aren't smart enough to code." I was under a lot of stress back then. Brick said, his hands sweating. "I admire your company, Karen. I can bring operational efficiency." She let him talk for 10 minutes. She watched him squirm. She enjoyed it. "You know, Brick," she said, finally closing his folder, "we do have an opening. In the warehouse. Loading trucks. Night shift. Minimum wage." Brick stood up, his face burning. "I was a CEO." "You were a husband who got fired by his wife," Karen corrected him. "And frankly, based on your balance sheets, you weren't a very good CEO either. Take the warehouse job or leave it." He left. But by the 5th rejection, the warehouse job started sounding like a dream. He was rejected by startups run by 20-year-olds in hoodies who laughed at his boomer energy. He was rejected by consulting firms who simply Googled his name during the interview and asked him to leave the building. He was radioactive. By month 4, the money was gone. He stood in a pawn shop on 8th Avenue, watching a man with a loupe examine his Patek Philippe. It was a limited edition worth $80,000 new. $5,000, the pawnbroker grunted. "It's worth 80, Brick cried. "Look at the movement. It's Swiss. It's scratched," the man lied. "And it's stolen property, for all I know. Take the 5 or get out. Get out." Brick took the 5. It paid for another 2 months at the motel and the legal fees to keep Saul from quitting. He sold his cufflinks next, then his designer sunglasses, then the leather briefcase Calla had bought him for their first anniversary. He watched his identity be dismantled piece by piece, sold for pennies on the dollar to strangers. He stopped eating 3 meals a day. He started skipping lunch. He lost weight. His face became gaunt, his eyes hollowed out by insomnia and stress. The arrogance that had defined his posture evaporated, replaced by a permanent jittery flinch. He jumped when sirens went off. He avoided eye contact with people on the street, terrified he would be recognized, yet devastated that he was now invisible. One Tuesday, sitting in the motel room, eating a cup of instant noodles, he saw an ad in the local paper. High-end event staff needed. Valet and coat check. Immediate start. Cash tips. It was humiliating. It was beneath him. It was exactly the kind of job he used to mock. But Saul had called that morning. "The DA is pushing for a trial date, Brick. I need more money for the forensic accountant, or we're dead in the water." Brick circled the ad with a trembling hand. The interview for the valet company was brief. They didn't Google him. They just checked if he had a valid driver's license and could drive a stick shift. "You look like you've been through the ringer, pal," the manager, a beefy guy named Tony, said, handing him a polyester uniform that was 2 sizes too big. "Don't crash the cars, don't steal the change in the ashtrays, and smile at the rich folks. They like it when you bow a little." "I can do that," Brick whispered. Putting on the uniform was the final surrender. The polyester scratched his skin. The pants were too short. The name tag was cheap plastic with a label maker strip that just said, "Mark." To us all. Brick Sterling, the visionary, the CEO, the man who was going to change the world, was dead. In his place stood Mark the valet, a ghost haunting the parking lots of the elite, parking the cars of men he used to call peers, waiting for the final blow that he knew deep down was still coming. 6 months later, New York City was dressed in its finest evening wear for the event of the season. The inaugural gala for the Vance Foundation for Digital Literacy. The venue was the Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue, a fortress of limestone and light that glowed like a beacon against the darkening November sky. Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers trembled from the vibrations of a live orchestra, and champagne flowed like water. The guest list was a who's who of the global elite tech moguls, senators, foreign dignitaries, and old money families who had ruled the city for generations. Outside on the curb, the reality was starkly different. A biting wind whipped down the avenue, carrying with it a mixture of sleet and exhaust fumes. Standing at the valet podium, shivering in a polyester uniform that was 2 sizes too big, was a man named Mark. To the guests handing him their keys, Mark was invisible. He was a prop, a mechanism to move their Ferraris and Aston Martins to the underground garage. None of them looked at his face, which was gaunt and pale. The skin stretched tight over his cheekbones. None of them noticed the hollow, haunted look in his eyes, or the way his hands trembled when the temperature dropped. And none of them recognized Brick Sterling, the man who less than a year ago would have been inside the ballroom, holding a flute of Dom Perignon and holding court at the head table. "Hey, buddy, wake up." A set of keys hit Brick in the chest, snapping him out of his daze. Brick fumbled to catch them. He looked up to see a man in a tuxedo looking at him with disdain. Brick's stomach lurched. It was Jason Thorpe, the CEO of a cloud computing rival Brick had once tried to acquire in a hostile takeover. "Don't scratch it," Thorpe snapped, gesturing to a sleek black Bentley Continental. "It's worth more than your whole life." "Yes, sir," Brick whispered, keeping his head bowed low so the brim of his cap shadowed his face. He climbed into the Bentley. The smell of the interior rich leather expensive cologne and the faint scent of success hit him like a physical blow. It smelled like his old life. It smelled like the days when he was the one tossing keys to someone else. He gripped the steering wheel, fighting back hot, stinging tears. This is a mistake, he thought, his mind spiraling into the delusion that had kept him sane for weeks. "I'll be back on top soon. This is just a strategy, a temporary setback." But as he parked the car in the dark, grease-stained garage and trudged back up the concrete ramp to the street, the cold air slapped the delusion out of him. He wasn't a CEO on a break. He was a valet out on bail working for tips to pay a lawyer who barely remembered his name. "Heads up, Mark," the valet captain, a burly man named Tony, barked. "Big arrival, the guest of honor, VIP protocol. Open the door, don't speak unless spoken to, and for God's sake, stand up straight." A hush fell over the entrance. The paparazzi, who had been chatting idly behind the velvet ropes, suddenly snapped to attention, their cameras raised like weapons. A car turned the corner. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement. It was a vintage silver and black Rolls-Royce Phantom 6, the kind of vehicle that belonged to royalty or heads of state. The Kingsley family crest was discreetly emblazoned on the side door. Brick froze. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He knew that car. He had begged Calla to let him drive it once years ago. She had refused, saying it was for family business only. He wanted to run. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to flee, to hide in the alleyway, to vanish into the steam of the subway grates. But Tony was watching him. If he walked away, he lost the job. If he lost the job, he lost the bail money. If he lost the bail money, he went to Rikers Island. He was trapped. He forced his legs to move his cheap rubber-soled shoes, scuffing against the pavement. He approached the rear passenger door of the Rolls-Royce as it purred to a stop. The flashbulbs began to pop a blinding strobe light of white explosions. Brick reached out with a shaking hand and pulled the heavy door open. First came the scent. It wasn't the cheap vanilla air freshener of the taxicabs he now took. It was jasmine and white rose Caller's signature scent. Then a shoe touched the pavement, a heel encrusted with diamonds. Caller Vance stepped out. The air seemed to leave Brick's lungs. She was unrecognizable from the woman he had divorced. The mouse he had mocked, the woman he had forced to wear sensible flats and modest colors so she wouldn't outshine him, was gone. In her place stood a queen. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged her silhouette before cascading down in a train that shimmered like the night sky. Diamonds, real heavy. Kingsley diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. Her hair, once kept in a severe bun to please him, flowed in soft, luxurious waves around her shoulders. She didn't look downtrodden. She didn't look like a divorcee. She looked like she owned the city. Behind her, stepping out of the other side of the car, was Sir Arthur Kingsley, looking dapper in a tuxedo and leaning on his lion-head cane. And following him was Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper Brick had fired for being too old. Mrs. Higgins was now dressed in a sharp, tailored silk suit, holding a tablet looking every bit the chief operations officer she had become. Brick held the door, his body rigid, his head bowed so low his chin touched his chest. "Don't look at me," he prayed. "Please God, just walk past me." But fate, having waited this long to deliver its final lesson, was not going to be lenient. "Thank you," Calla said, her voice clear and melodic. She turned to hand the valet a tip. She paused. The hand holding the door was familiar. The watch was gone, replaced by a pale band of untanned skin where the Patek Philippe used to be. But she knew the hands. "Brick." The whisper was barely audible over the clicking of the cameras, but it roared in Brick's ears. He slowly lifted his head. Their eyes locked. For a second, the world stopped. The noise of the city faded. It was just the two of them, the conqueror and the conquered. Brick opened his mouth, but his throat was dry as dust. He saw his own reflection in her eyes, a gaunt, broken man in a clown suit. "Calla," he croaked, his voice cracking. He didn't know what to say. "Take me back. I'm sorry. I'm hungry." Sir Arthur stepped up beside his niece. He squinted at the valet, and then a look of dark amusement crossed his face. "Well, well, the wheel of fortune turns quickly, doesn't it, Mr. Sterling?" Mrs. Higgins peered over her spectacles. "Mr. Sterling, please be careful with the clutch. The Rolls is sensitive. Unlike you, it requires a gentle touch." Brick flinched as if slapped. The humiliation was total. The staff he had abused were now looking down on him from the heights of Olympus. "Ellie, please," Brick whispered, stepping closer, ignoring the protocol. I'm in a bad way. The lawyers, they took everything. I'm living in a motel in Queens. I just need a chance. A loan. Anything." The cameras were flashing frantically now. The paparazzi had realized who the valet was. "Fallen CEO begs ex-wife." The headlines would scream tomorrow. Calla looked at him. Her expression wasn't angry. It wasn't hateful. It was something far worse. It was pity. Cold, distant pity. She opened her silver clutch. "You always said I didn't understand the value of money, Brick," she said softly. "You said I was a burden." She pulled out a single crisp $100 bill. "Here," she said, extending it to him. Brick stared at the bill. It was the ultimate degradation. She was tipping him. "Take it," she commanded, her voice gaining the steel of a CEO. "Buy yourself a hot meal. You look unwell." His hand shaking violently. Brick reached out and took the money. The texture of the bill felt like burning coal against his skin. "Thank you. Lady Kingsley." He whispered the title, tasting like ash in his mouth. "Goodbye, Brick," she said. She turned her back on him, taking her uncle's arm. "Come, Arthur. We have a company to run." She began to ascend the red-carpeted stairs, the light of the chandeliers welcoming her home. Brick stood on the curb, clutching the $100, watching the woman he had thrown away ascend to heaven while he remained in hell. "Brick Sterling." A heavy hand landed on his shoulder. Brick spun around. Two NYPD officers stood there, stone-faced. Behind them, a squad car sat with its lights, swirling red and blue, reflecting in the puddles of the gutter. "Yes," Brick breathed. "You're under arrest," the officer said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Arrest for what?" Brick panicked, backing up against the Rolls-Royce. "I'm out on bail. I haven't left the state. New charges filed this afternoon," the officer said, grabbing Brick's wrist and spinning him around. "Wire fraud, money laundering, and falsifying corporate records. Your friend Greg Holloway just gave the district attorney the encryption keys to the servers. It's over." The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked shut around Brick's wrists. The same wrists that had once worn cufflinks, worth more than the officer's annual salary. "No, please!" Brick shouted as they shoved him toward the squad car. He looked frantically up the stairs. Calla, help me!" at the top of the stairs, just before the glass doors. Calla paused. She didn't turn around. She simply adjusted her shawl, straightened her spine, and walked into the light, the heavy doors closing behind her. Brick was shoved into the back of the police cruiser. The hard plastic seat was uncomfortable. The cage separated him from the world. As the car pulled away, sirens wailing, Brick pressed his face against the glass. He watched the gala fade into the distance. He watched his past, his future, and his freedom disappear. He looked down at his lap. He had dropped the $100 bill on the floor of the police car. It lay there in the dirt, just out of reach of his cuffed hands. The karma had finally come full circle. He had forced his wife out with nothing but the clothes on her back. Now he was leaving with even less. And that is the story of Brick Sterling, a man who learned the hard way that you should never mistake silence for weakness, and you should never bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand belongs to a Kingsley. Brick thought he could destroy Calla to save himself, but all he did was free her to become the queen she was always meant to be. It's a brutal reminder that in relationships and in life, integrity is the only currency that matters. Money can be lost, jobs can be taken, but the truth always has a way of coming out. Calla walked away with her dignity and her empire, while Brick was left with nothing but a prison sentence and the memory of what he threw away. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What do you think Brick deserved? Did he get off too easy, or was this the perfect punishment? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.